Thank you all so much for joining us for this webinar today. We will be talking with Mary Democker about reclaiming a thriving future, climate action, justice, and resilience in the time of COVID. My name is Katy Kolker, and I am the Executive Director of Families for a Livable Climate, based here in Portland, Oregon. I'm joined today by my co-host, Leonard Barrett, who is one of our fabulous board members. Families for a Livable Climate is a nonprofit organization that is mobilizing parents, kids, and families to take action for climate justice and a livable planet. Together, we are building knowledge, power, and hope as we unite for a vibrant future for all. We do this through creating spaces and opportunities for action that are accessible for busy parents and inclusive of all ages and identities. We advocate for policy and systems change to address the climate crisis and its root causes through a strong lens of equity and justice. We support adults and young people in learning about and raising our voices on critical issues and fighting together for a vibrant future for our kids and their entire generation. You can read more about what we're up to and how to get involved by visiting our website, which is familiesforclimate.org. And while you're there, you can sign up for our mailing list so we can keep you in the loop about upcoming events and actions. So this event is the first in our new series of online webinars that we are hosting in lieu of the in-person general meetings that we would otherwise be hosting if not for the pandemic. So we're really glad to be together today, and we are really honored to have Mary Democker here as our guest speaker. Mary Democker is a renowned author and activist whose work has inspired parent climate advocates around the country and beyond, including many on the call here today. Her book is titled The Parent's Guide to Climate Revolution: 100 Ways to Build a Fossil-Free Future, Raise Empowered Kids, and Still Get a Good Night's Sleep. Her book has been featured on NPR, the New York Times, and was a finalist for the Oregon Book Award. Mary is also co-founder and was the former creative director for 350 Eugene, where she led art-centered protests, which were featured on PBS NewsHour and in an Avaz video that was shown to world leaders. She has also written for many publications, including The Sun, EcoWatch, The Oregonian, Common Dreams, and Sierra Magazine, among others. More information about Mary and links to her writing can be found on her website, marydemocker.com. We are so honored to have Mary here today. Can't wait to hear and see her presentation. But before I hand it over, I wanted to let you know that we have time at the end for a Q&A with Mary. And so if you have any questions, hold on to them. And when we get to the Q&A, we'll ask you to type them into the chat box. We also want to let you know that we will be sending out a follow-up email after this webinar to everyone who registered, which will include links to any key resources that are mentioned today. So thanks again for joining us. I would like to pass the mic on to Mary Democker. Mary, thank you for being here today.
Hi, everybody. I'm so honored to have this time with you. And I really want to acknowledge how busy parents and teachers and any young people that might be here are. And I know what a big deal it is to take time out and be on a screen again in the middle of the day. So I think what I'll do is just launch, well, actually I'll maybe say one thing that might just help you understand a little more where I'm coming from. Besides being the author of a book, The Parent's Guide to Climate Revolution, I'm also the co-founder and former creative director of 350 Eugene, and have been an activist, social justice activist since my days in college in the 1980s. So what I'm going to do now is launch into a slideshow for you, and it'll take me a moment to just share, and you can let me know, Leonard, if there are any issues. Also, I want to make sure, I don't think I thanked Katy and Leonard. Thank you so much for everything that you've done to put this together and to have this conversation and start this group. And thank you to Families for a Livable Climate. I'm really excited to see where you're going to go and how I can be part of it. Okay, are we good on sharing? You can see, Leonard, the thing that we're wanting you to see? Okay, great. Okay, this is my family, by the way. This is my family a few years ago. They're back home right now. You know, they were launched into their young lives in college, and now they're sheltering at home with us still. You'll see their faces a few times throughout. They've been wonderful partners in this journey. So a lot of what I'm sharing is based on my experiences with them. Okay. So here's what I'm going to go through in the next half hour. The first is going to be creating connections between the coronavirus and the climate crisis, two big crises largely affecting parents right now. And then we'll move into a section on similarly connecting climate justice and racial justice. And I want to just share that a lot of this is still new for me. I'm quickly trying to educate myself along with a lot of people in this country and in the world on how to be a good ally and how to become anti-racist. And I'll share some resources. There are lots out there. I'm sure a lot of you are already finding them, but I'll just share the ones that I found especially useful. I will share good news and bad news on the road ahead, given how high the stakes are right now. And then a lot of ideas for action and a special section on art protest from home during a pandemic. That's kind of my special, the sweet spot in my life is using the arts for protest. I just want to acknowledge again how burned out teachers and parents are, and that I want this to be something that can give you some ideas and not be more for you to do, more for you to put on a to-do list. So first, the connections between coronavirus and climate. There have been a lot of these made, and I kind of gathered up my own thoughts and those of people whose ideas I follow over the years. And I'll just run through some, some comparisons. It's big. We can't fix it alone as individuals through recycling or through even just wearing masks ourselves. Individual actions matter, but we really do need a coordinated response. Society has shown in the coronavirus how quickly it can adapt and learn new, businesses are doing new things, people are learning quickly, and of course we can do the same in the climate crisis, and we must. In both crises, science is very, very important, and disinformation can kill people and is killing people in both of these. The president has a really huge platform, and he's using it, in my opinion, to harm and even kill people at this point in both of these crises through denialism and spreading false information. Both of these require massive government funding to address effectively, and the US has spent already about $3 trillion on stimulus packages and government funding to address the coronavirus crisis. Mouthful. Both of them have a ticking clock. If you don't act quickly, you have a bigger problem. The more quickly you act, the cheaper the problem is to mitigate. Also, I think a really interesting issue in the climate and corona crises, that in the coronavirus crisis, we're asking young people to sacrifice, their lives, their fun, their careers in many cases, their freedoms, for the health and well-being of elders who are more vulnerable. And a lot of young people are saying, well, is the elder generation going to do the same for us in the climate crisis? We've been asking for years for them to address this issue, for them to listen to us. So I think we can really use this, this angle as we encourage people to listen to youth voices on the climate crisis. People of color are disproportionately impacted by both crises, and we're going to talk about this more. Women in particular are impacted by both of these crises, and a lot of us who are mothers have experienced that sense of we're called on a little more often than our partners. We're more likely to, there is research already that shows that mothers are getting less work time in and are a little more stressed out and burned out doing more of the homeschooling. There are other things you can see on this list to the right in terms of we don't enjoy as women as many job protections and like sick leave. Domestic violence, as predicted, is now up during this coronavirus as it is during any time of economic hardship, and I would say cabin fever at this point. And again, relating it to climate. Climate breakdown and the climate crisis are both increasing violence against women. This is well documented. I won't go into it much here, but I will say that any kind of civil unrest, any kind of social unrest, any kind of climate breakdown, natural disaster results in girls' education getting interrupted, making them more vulnerable to abuse. And as a mother and as someone who was a girl, as a woman, I find that very mobilizing for me to do what I can to mitigate those issues and to really sound the alarm for women and our vulnerability in this global crisis. Millions of people are getting pushed into poverty because of the coronavirus. They're predicting, depending on which models you are looking at, there is one model that's predicting 500 million people will be pushed into extreme poverty by the climate crisis. And if you really just let that sink in a little bit, you know, people who are already at the edge being pushed into extreme poverty at those numbers. And those are overwhelmingly communities of color. So here's a quote that I just really have been internalizing as I'm studying and researching and reflecting on the questions we're bringing up today. Hopkins has a beautiful essay in Sierra magazine maybe 3 weeks ago. And one of the quotes I love in this that kind of says it all is, you can't have climate change without sacrifice zones. You can't have sacrifice zones without disposable people. You can't have disposable people without racism. And that to me is the most cogent, logical 1, 2, 3 that I've found, the most kind of concise to share with people why we can't solve the climate crisis without addressing racism. And this is one of the big things that people debate a lot in the climate movement is, well, I don't want to solve it all. Why do we have to solve everything? Well, this is why. So I want to just run through on a unifying theme of choking, of people unable to breathe as a connection between racism and the climate crisis. So we've heard a lot about Eric Garner and George Floyd's last words, "I can't breathe." Well, what we don't hear enough about is how many communities of color have had toxic facilities in the US and abroad, but I'm talking about the US right now, placed in their communities, next to their schools, next to hospitals and churches, to the tune of, just in Los Angeles alone, there are over 1,000 active oil wells and gas wells. The overwhelming majority of those are within 500 yards of schools, residential homes, churches, and hospitals. So 500 yards from oil rigs, from refineries, from coal plants that are burning, you know, filling the air with toxins. So that's just something I think we really need to move front and center in our discussion about environmental racism and the climate, any kind of climate justice. When you have more polluted air, you're going to have more asthma, more respiratory diseases, more stress, more heart conditions, everything. It's all related. And there's more and more research now about how many times Black kids are more likely to die than white of complications from asthma, to the tune of 10 times as many children dying. Meanwhile, Trump has given himself the ability to roll back all of the protections. There are 100 protections either being rolled back or already rolled back in the last few months by the Trump administration, by Trump himself. So to me, this is a side note we can't get into, but the power of the executive branch is far too large at this point. If one megalomaniac can roll back 100 hard-won, half-century-old environmental protections. Communities are suffering now more than ever from polluted soil, water, and air. Then when communities come to speak out about police brutality, violence, racism, toxic environmental racism, they're more and more often being subjected to tear gas, making it harder to breathe. again, in the last few nights, we've had tear gassing in Portland, where you are. I think the majority of people on this call are in Portland, and I'm trying to follow that and be a good ally to you in whatever way I can. We might actually come up there this week, we'll see. Now I'd like to move to the global stage in terms of the look at environmental racism. Industries are very good at preying on communities of color worldwide. I'm just going to give a few. This is just a tiny little peek compared to what is actually happening on a global level. There's less financial wealth, there's less generational wealth, there are fewer protections for human rights and for environmental rights in a lot of these communities abroad. One crisis right now isn't fossil fuel, but palm oil plantations that are ripping through indigenous traditional lands, and then people are working there and then inhaling the smoke that smolders sometimes for years when the plantation owners burn this in order to, they burn the jungle, the forest, in order to do monocrops. Rainforest, Ecuadorian rainforest in the Amazon, they're fighting hundreds of extractive projects. And now I want to move to the idea not just of placement of toxic facilities, but that vulnerabilities are greater in the infrastructure in communities of color. So right here in the US and Houston, far more flooding, and in Puerto Rico. And then there's a secondary issue after a natural disaster, of which of course we're having more. And that is, it's very hard for communities that have weaker infrastructures. Now they aren't as sturdy, they aren't as robust in their architecture and in their flood drainage and such. It's harder when you suddenly can't get to work or you can't get water. It's hard for communities to bounce back in places like Puerto Rico. Diseases become a secondary wave of crisis. I also want to just mention, when you have a climate out of balance, you have more droughts, you have this swinging back and forth, this ping-ponging, drought, and then floods. And when you have torrential floods, you're going to have mudslides. And this one, 3 years ago, buried over 1,000 people, and basically the village disappeared. Again, communities of color paying for the violations to their health and sovereignty that the global north has engaged in over the last several decades. So I would posit that it's a form of white supremacy. This is not my original argument. This is in that Hopkins article. It's white supremacy to use up all the climate in pursuit of material wealth in the industrial north, and for the people who had very little to do with filling the climate with pollution and carbon and methane, to leave them to suffer greater impacts and to die. So I'll end this section by saying, again, Hopkins, as long as we keep letting polluters sacrifice brown and Black communities, we cannot protect our shared climate. And I would just, for my own thinking, I'd flip that. Okay, so when we together stop letting polluters sacrifice brown and Black communities, we actually have a shot at protecting and healing our shared planet. So now just take a breath, and this section is going to be about, okay, so that was a lot of intense information. There's going to be a little bit more before we move to action, but I would like to just offer this moment to reflect on, who do we want to be in this crisis? What can we do? And what are the steps that we can take? There's some things on the side that you can read. I'm seeing that I need to move a little bit faster, so I might not read all of them. Personal education is the first step. And with kids, to connect them to some of that personal education through some youth groups like 0 Hour, Sunrise, and the Fridays for Future groups. We'll look at the road ahead. Here's the bad news first. Siberia is on fire. 2020 may be the hottest ever, we'll see. We've been told by some economic global groups that we have just a few months to turn things around climate-wise in order to reach the Paris climate targets, which actually aren't even enough. So that's scary. The idea being that all these stimulus packages are going to shape our energy future over the next 3 decades, and they have to be shaped towards justice, towards Green New Deal policies, and toward cleaner energy, reforestation, universal health care, a lot of those packages that you see proposed in policies linked to the Green New Deal. However, the US has already given $3 billion in bailout to 5,600 fossil fuel companies. More bad news, there won't be many more. This is the last slide of bad news. Trump really could win again. He's certainly in Portland showing himself to be someone who's trampling democratic rights. A couple of our Supreme Court justices have been in the hospital in the last couple months. And the Jordan Cove pipeline is, after being off the table, is back on the table and a priority for Trump. 3 other pipelines were recently defeated, which is a huge win for indigenous communities, youth activists, climate activists, and leaders at the local level that have been supportive. And that's good news. And the bad news is that puts more pressure on us here in Oregon to defeat the Jordan Cove pipeline, because it's, the other ones being canceled means there's more pressure to use Oregon's. Okay, now we're going to jump to good news. I'm putting Biden first. A lot of people don't necessarily think that he's a very good, a piece of good news, but I'm going to stand by my strategy, and many people's strategy in the climate movement, which is, this is our choice. We need to get Trump out, and we can push Biden to do science-based and much more just climate justice policy. One of the things I recommend doing with young people is to compare the platforms of the Democrats with the Republicans. That's a chapter in my book. You can look that up. It's pretty jaw-dropping, the difference. So people that think there's no difference between them really actually might want to be informed by reading the policies themselves. More good news, the Oregon leaders are pushing back on Trump trying to put in the Jordan Cove pipeline. I think this is the biggest piece of good news, which is the Black Lives Matter movement has been called the biggest movement in US history. Let that sink in. The other thing to let sink in is that we only need 3.5% of the population to be actively engaged in a nonviolent movement in order for that movement to succeed. And that's in the book, you'll cite it on the right there. And by the way, you don't have to write stuff down. I'm going to give all of these resources to Katy and Leonard afterwards, and they're going to email them to you. So let that sink in too. We've got more than 3.5% going right now. And that's not to say it's going to be easy or short, but in the research of the last 100 years, every time a movement engaged 3.5% in a nonviolent fashion, the campaign was successful and the changes were the longest lasting. So that's the biggest piece of good news. I also think it's interesting, since I believe most of you are parents, is to notice how much global media has been paying attention to the wall of moms and the dad pods. So I think we can really have confidence that using our moral authority in the climate crisis is effective, and that's why there are more groups like Parents for Future and Our Kids Climate and Climate Mamas and Mothers Out Front on the national level. So I'll put those in the resource too for you to follow them and join their campaigns and link on an international level. Okay, so now we're going to pivot to part 2, which is the menu for action. It's not conclusive. It's not a to-do list. Take what you need and leave the rest. It's going to be have 3 approaches here. The number 1 is staying healthy, centered, connected. Number 2, education. And number 3, action. So for the staying sane part, I actually have already put this into a free resource that's on my homepage of marydemocker.com. And there are 100 ways to thrive in the coronavirus time and keep kids moving, keep them engaged in political activism and empowering education from home. So I'm just going to toss that out. It's on my homepage. You can print it out. You can look at it. There's also my book that has a lot of resources drawn, that are represented in this list of 100. Get kids outside, you probably already know that here in the Northwest. And then just a quick idea about natural resource restoration has been found to be much more effective at sequestering carbon, locking it into the soil than was previously believed. So if you have, hands-on kids, or you want to be hands-on, find out what watershed groups are restoring riparian areas. Find out who's replanting. Find out who's protecting, the coastal wetlands. And those are all resources online. Okay, part 2, educating ourselves. I'm going to include the resource list for Black Lives Matter, reading lists for adults, and one for kids. I am really learning a lot from How to Be an Anti-Racist by Ibram X. Kendi, and White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo. I actually don't read these, I listen to them because I find that I'm super busy and I do gardening, and actually I don't do gardening. You can do gardening. I can't garden. That's a side note. But I do chores and I exercise and I hike. So Libro is a way to bypass Amazon and still listen to good books on tape. Read this essay, I've already mentioned it, and the resources will be in that list for you. Racism is Killing the Planet. This is a really important book for us as parents and teachers. Youth to Power, it just came out by Jamie Margolin. She's the founder of Zero Hour, and she has written a book that I've reviewed in Sierra Magazine. It just came out yesterday, and it's far better. It far exceeded my hopes in terms of an activism guidebook. I learned a lot from it. So I think it's great for adults, it's great for young people, but it's really also good for parents to read with their kids and for teachers to use as a teaching resource. I also really want to advocate getting kids connected and inspired by these young leaders like Greta and Shateska Martinez from Earth Guardians. And there are more and more every day that are out there speaking up through Sunrise, through Fridays for Future, which is the group that Greta started. Follow those kids. They need followers. They need amplification. They need local support. So I really highly recommend, as a family, finding young people who inspire you. Okay, now we're moving to the action part of this talk. Lots of signs, you've all seen them. You've probably done them from your house. This won't be a radical idea for speaking up for racial justice. Here's just something that was a campaign for Earth Day that was through Our Kids Climate. Unleash kid creativity. They have a really good time once you open up the idea of where we can perform, where we can be artistic, what defines a protest. Use public space that you control, whether it's your front lawn if you have one, or your front door, or your car, or your bike, or your body. Just find ways to speak out publicly and have a good time with it. Again, I'm going to push hard on getting out the vote. We're in serious danger of voter suppression, of chaos from the coronavirus, making people in states where they aren't going to have mail-in ballots afraid to go vote. We're seeing some serious voter suppression and racism at the polls. One solution that we can all do from home as families in a pandemic is to write letters. They're more effective than postcards. Phone calls are effective. Swing Left is a very good resource for this. Have a party in your backyard. If this appeals to you, it is proven to be effective. One thing that I just want to share that we did, I'm going to show you 3 front lawn projects that I did with my family. And the first one's kind of easy. The second one is pretty big and involved. And the third one is easy again. So hang tight. These are all relevant for where we're going. First one is registering voters from home, if you have a lawn or a front door. In 2012, I was nervous about the election and did a power station on my front lawn with inspiring, quotes, and then voter registration that I stamped for people. That was worth the $30 to have a bunch of stamps. Note that a lot of people are moving because of coronavirus, and they're going to move again. Make sure that those people in your neighborhood are all registered in their new locations to vote. This is another separate front lawn installation, but we did kind of a silly one to encourage people to make calls to swing states. And then we put out the links. We gave information and they could take home about how to do it and some talking points and websites and places to call. So again, Swing Left is a good resource for that. Okay, now here's the big one, and this is, now we're jumping to the protesting the Jordan Cove pipeline, which is threatened now in our state. This is a 2005 block-long protest that was done in collaboration with 350. It was 6 days long, and we condemned 6 houses on my block, and we ran a life-size pipeline through it. Bill McKibben tweeted it out globally, and we sent a press release to local, I don't know, I didn't even do that many, 1 or 2, and it got incredible amounts of publicity because it was out of the box and a little desperate. There was a news tie-in with a global environmental law conference. So you can see press releases in my book in the back or on my website under resources. Jamie Margolin also tells you how to do press releases. Your kids can do them. They're not that hard, and the media loves to hear from kids. I invited a fractivist from Colorado who happened to be in town. He spoke, Shataskat Martinez, and to the left of the screen, you'll see 2 landowners. They came and spoke about the Pembina, which had a different name back then, trying to take their land. That's still happening. And all the young people on the other side helped with social media. We had information, we had a kids corner, we had a newsroom, we had a selfie station, and we flooded Kate Brown with selfies for telling her that she needed to help make sure this pipeline didn't get built. The take home from all of this, the impact was our neighborhood was more unified. Kids got involved in climate advocacy for the first time. We have a lot of kids on the block. This is not at all the whole block represented. And the media publicity, there were 6 days of radio coverage and multiple TV coverage and front page news above the fold with a photograph, which then led to 350 Eugene getting contacted and coordinating a statewide LNG resistance campaign. Okay, now I'm gonna move back to something that's a little more low key. If you feel like, well, that was intimidating, I'm not ever gonna do something like that. But I do wanna say a big project like that can be done with a lot of hands. You could do it as an organization if it speaks to you. And this is also just to give you seed ideas for what you might do. Portland is, you're sort of rocking it. So I feel a little bit like, I don't need to give you any ideas. You guys are like writing, you're leading the way. You're getting global coverage for your creativity and your protest right now. Okay, so this is just an idea for fall, Halloween. The graveyard that you want to see in your lifetime or in your kids' lifetime. What do you want to see underground? We did it as a 350 project, and we did all the art supplies and provided the room. You could make it, you could do it earlier or do it in the outdoors. Do it earlier in September and have an early Halloween project. It doesn't have to be on lawns, it can be in your front window. This is just a little side, like breather moment for visual of, it's a great time for puppet making. This is our Sun Queen that 350 Eugene made. And 350 Eugene made this, and this is Kate Brown, the puppet that has toured all over the state. Okay, now I'm gonna move to ways to support young people and amplify their voices during a pandemic. One thing you can do is give them money. And I've named some of these groups, 0 Hour, Fridays for Future, local youth, local climate clubs at your high school. We did in 350 a climate camp for several summers, a day camp. Somebody got college credit and a grant to do this. So we had me as an like a mentor, and then a college student who was actually the teacher. The kids loved it. And they wrote speeches and gave them at a protest. Again, obviously this is older, before the pandemic, but you can do this outside with distancing and masks. You know this. Protests don't have to be big and organized. You can go to the courthouse with a child and a sign, in ways that work for your family. I want to just shout out to Aya de Leon. I think she's on this call on the treadmill. I can't see right now. Hi, Aya, if you can hear me. Aya has been organizing families as part of Sunrise down in her community in the Bay Area. And you can check it out. I'll have it on the resource page. She writes for the Daily Dose, which is a feminist climate blog written by majority women of color. They've been doing Freedom Fridays, family walk and chalks. And she has a piece about that that's pretty great. Okay, moving to the older ones. For those of you that have older or more independent young adults, it's legal to shine, project a message on a building. Here are some banner drops by the Sunrise Movement in Seattle. I don't know if you can read it on this slide, but it says, which side are you on? And on one side, police budget 409 million. On the other side, education budget 105 million. Very well designed, high impact, and exciting for young people to be part of those banner drops. I want to just remind us all, but I think it's important to remind young people, whether they're your students, your clients, your children, is that when we fight, we win. And there is a huge movement now. Nobody has to start it by themselves. There are so many already going. You just join it and push it along. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. Just push it along in ways that work for you and for your family. Stakes are higher than ever with this election. We know that. And there's a revolution going on right now. I think that we can really name that in this moment right now and be part of it. And that's my last slide. And I thank you for your time. I know that was a lot of information, and I'm gonna thank you for your attention and turn you back over to Leonard.
Hey there, everybody. So we're gonna move to the Q&A portion now, and feel free to put your questions into the chat, and I'm gonna moderate those and read them aloud to Mary. Give everybody a second to click over there. If anybody's having trouble finding that, if you mouse over the screen, there's a speech bubble at the bottom. And Mary, I'll jump in with a starter question here. I think that a lot of what is out there in the kind of space, especially with just with respect to youth broadly, is so tailored for older youth, kind of preteens and teens. And I'm curious, and I know there's some of this in your book, and you've already spoken to it a little bit here, but I know that a lot of the folks that our group tends to attract have pretty young kids. And I'm wondering if you can speak a little bit to some other kind of, strategies and examples. I think of my 4-year-old, and I think as much as anything, it's like, she's going to pick up a lot about sort of, justice and environmental stewardship sort of, by osmosis. But I also struggle sometimes to also think, more specifically about how we sort of, guide her and her, kind of picture of the world and sense of responsibility around these issues. I'm curious if you could speak to that.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. Actually, I have a talk just about that, so I'm going to try to pull in my mind from that. I think with younger children, I do think it's different. I think that when they're younger is when it's such a good time to do lifestyle things a lot. We did a lot at home with, I didn't talk about green living and simple living, but we did that pretty intensely all the way through, but especially when the kids were young. And the idea was that we're modeling how to live in more harmony with the earth. And we're telling them this is how we do it, and that we care. So it's a lifestyle of care for the beings, the animals around us, in terms of how we choose to eat, in terms of how we, we rescued worms from puddles when my son was 3 and 4. That was what he wanted to do. So we cultivated a sense of connection to the natural world. We immersed them in it. And now they want nothing more than to go out in it, mountain biking or camping or swimming in mountain lakes. So I think a lifestyle that immerses young people in nature and helps them. I don't think they even need help falling in love with it. I think they need help staying connected to it because our lives are indoors. So I think getting out and planting things, gardens, getting dirty, playing in a relaxed way in a park and a lake, and talking about the beauty of the earth, talking about the beauty of animals, connecting with nature around you just by being relaxed in it and then immersed in it in a way that the adults are relaxed, which means slowing down. So that's one thought, is just getting out into nature. We did a ton of books about, social justice, ethic of care, love of nature, love of people, all kinds of people, where we are modeling and talking about, we take care of our neighbors, we take care of our aging parents, we take care of you, we take care of the dog, we take care of the garden, and showing them what it looks like to take care, to have stewardship of a planet. It starts locally. And then as they get older or show interest, they ask those questions about, wow, I heard this thing about the climate. Are we doomed? I heard at school that, we're not gonna, the oceans are gonna be more plastic than fish. And take those opportunities to, step by step, bring them into the peril that they're seeing, whether it's from observing it themselves, like with clear cuts, or hearing about it at school, but pairing it with empowerment and things that they can do to make a difference. And that can be, there's a lot about how to do that at home, whether it's reducing plastic intake, whether it's, reducing or eliminating animal foods, whether it's recycling everything, whether it's, using public transportation. There's a lot of information about that. So I didn't really focus on that much because it's so well documented. But I try to, encourage people with new ideas about family political actions they can take, because there's not much out there about that. So I think it's great to bring that up. Yes, lifestyle matters, and make those connections for what it looks like to care for nature and for our communities. And that might be soup kitchens on Thanksgiving. It might be bringing an elderly neighbor, shoveling the snow off of his or her driveway. So just to model love and connection across all ways of all of life, I guess would be the answer I would offer, with that eye towards, as they get older, they're going to need emotional support and maybe ways to take action that feel commensurate to the problem. And I do want to say, one of the things I say a lot is, it's important to talk to kids, but it's just as important to talk to other adults, because adults are the ones that can change things right now. Kids don't have time to grow up and have the money or the connections or even the vote in some cases. So I do see it as an adult. The ruling generation has to make the big political changes right now, while amplifying the voices of those who are on the front lines, which are young people. So I hope that gives kind of a broad idea. Yeah, I guess that's the best I would say right now. Making signs and putting them in your windows is a great first start, and asking them what they want to do to take action, I think is also really helpful, and following their interests.
Awesome. And there's a bunch of things you said roll really nicely into several of the other questions. So another one, and this is really broad. So I think, take it wherever. Where do you think parents and kids can have the biggest impact focusing on policy or awareness?
Okay. There's a lot of different ways. I would say right now it's to get Trump out and to push the concept of building back better, Green New Deal. Those are big, important topics right now that are, we have these moments in history when we have more leverage as citizens. And right now we're in one of those moments. In the lead up to an election, candidates are more responsive than they are after the election. So often people say that the Democrats will move a little to the left, then get in power, and then shift back to the right. So we right now have an opportunity to push them hard to the left, which is just to the science. We just need science-based policies. So it's not radical. I don't know why it's called left, it's just science-based. So I think to recognize this is one of those moments when we can have big system change from the top down, and then pivot when we're out of that moment. So, all of the stuff I was saying in the slideshow was about how we can help get Trump out right now, and then we'll have a different set of, ideas if that happens. So I think to pay attention to the moment that we're in and how much civic power we have. Another idea is to show up when it matters. And it sure seems like the mom showing up, the wall of moms showing up the other night in Portland mattered. It was 30 women starting out, and that went around the world. So I think that kind of authentic, passionate, stepping out in new and creative ways, you can always look for those opportunities. And that can be, who expected that to go viral the way it did with 30 women, 30 moms. So that's another thought, is to show up when it matters. That would also be in terms of the Jordan Cove pipeline. Show up when there are hearings, show up when there are decisions being made. So I think one of the things that I've seen as kind of, I would say not very effective, is clicktivism, where there's this campaign that's just sort of ongoing that a group has to, tell, President Trump not to roll back the EPA. Well, I'm sorry, but I'm not going to waste my time. Then they'll just have my email. I just don't see any point in that kind of going to the perpetrator who has absolutely no interest in your opinion and shows no signs of an authentic engagement in an authentic conversation, and wasting your time. So I'm pretty big on protest. I'm trying to think out of the box, like that, block long pipeline. I didn't have any idea that it would actually make a big difference. I just really felt strongly about it. So looking for creative opportunities together to put the climate justice issue on the front burner. One more thought is really amplify youth voices. And that can be done through helping them recognize what a lot of them don't, which is editorial pages like to hear from young people. They're fresh voices. They're tired of hearing from all of us that are, the executive director of this and that. It's great, but it's new to have just a high school kid or a middle schooler write and say, I'm scared. You guys are messing up. What can I need you to do this. So I guess I would say have an ask that's clear and that's tied to a particular moment when there's a decision being made. So right now, Kate Brown has to stop this pipeline, or right now, the school board has to decide on climate literacy. So choose those things that matter to you and choose the moment. If you don't have a lot of time, show up when it matters, show up when decisions are being made, and show up with young people, show up with kids, show up with their artwork, invite them to take the mic. And they're usually pretty thrilled when they're given an opportunity to engage in actual solutions and they feel heard by adults. If you look on my website, you'll see several videos and slideshows of some of the protests we've done where the young people have had the opportunity to speak, and they've always felt happier afterwards. And just one more thought about that is that Greta, I just read a book by her mother about how depressed and ill she was with eating disorder and selective mutism until she became a climate activist. So that disconnect between what adults were telling her was happening in the world and what they were doing themselves was eating her up inside. And so a lot of young people, once they have that alignment with this is what I'm hearing and this is what my community is doing, and now I can take this action, often there's this flourishing that I've seen and that Greta's mother writes about in her book, which is called Our House is on Fire, which is a great read. Again, I listened to it from a parent's point of view or a teacher's point of view.
That's great, thank you. We only have time for one more question, but there's actually there's one in here that we're not going to get to here, but I know there's a resource that involves you out there. So the question, and this one seems to come up a lot in our in our community, is how to talk to kids about climate change. So I would just point out, and we can include this in the resources, but there's a great interview that you did with Dr. Robin Silverman on that topic specifically. So folks interested in that, check it out, and it will be forthcoming in the resources. So final question here, and I know this will be difficult to winnow it down, but the question was, with the time pressure being so great, what do you think is the #1 action to take right now that could actually have some effect?
Great question. We all feel that, right? Busy parents. Before I answer that, I just jotted down, there's a new book about how to talk to your kids about the climate crisis, and I think that's the title. And it's by Harriet Sugarman, and she runs Climate Mamas, and she's wonderful. And I just read that when it came out last month. So it's something like how to talk to your kids about the climate crisis, move from angst to action. So that's another resource for you. Okay, the #1 thing that you can do right now to stop this tyrant, obscene pig, get him out of the White House, I think, well, would be to move to a swing state, which we can't do. That was actually one of my suggestions, was move to swing states, with your family or something, and vote if you have that capacity, or certainly go there and knock on doors. That's what my son was going to do until the pandemic. I think that I just go with what the experts say and what the research says, which is getting out the vote in the swing states right now, which means during a pandemic, writing letters, writing postcards, having those parties, donating money, making phone calls if you feel comfortable. You have a party, you're more likely to feel comfortable, so maybe get comfortable. Do the things that get out the vote, because that's what we desperately need. When Democrats lose, it's only because enough people haven't voted. Trump will win if he can, steal it somehow, or he can suppress the vote. And those are both very much dangerous. So anything you can do in the next 3 to 4 months to get the vote out in your own community and in swing states, I would say is the #1 climate justice action that we can take right now.
Well, thank you so much, Mary, for all of your really thought-provoking words and inspiration. It's been great. I personally got cut off due to a power outage, and I know there are at least a handful of others that did as well. So our apologies for that. Definitely not an expected thing. But we are recording this. We have it set so it only records the hosts. So none of you have to worry about your faces being on the recording. And we'll send out a link. So if anyone missed part of the presentation, you can watch it later. And I know that my introduction of Mary got cut off, and we only have a couple minutes left. So I'll just encourage you all to check out Mary's website. She has a lot of really inspiring writings and interviews on there, linked on there. And I would particularly direct you to her book, The Parent's Guide to Climate Revolution, which can be found at bookstores and at the library. And also Mary's written, she's got a copy of it right there. Mary has also written for a number of magazines, and her most recent articles are in Sierra magazine. She has one that just dropped yesterday and a really great one that was published around Mother's Day that I encourage you to check out. Yeah, I want to thank you all so much for being here. For those of you who are feeling inspired to take action and get involved, I wanted to let you know about a few opportunities with Families for a Livable Climate. We're growing our volunteer and activist teams, and we have a lot of different ways that folks can plug in who are interested. We have teams focused on policy and advocacy, teams focused on youth engagement, focused on equity and justice, communications and outreach, kind of whatever skills you have, whatever interests you have, we can likely find a great fit for you. So we're meeting remotely for now, and want to just let you know that joining us with kiddos by your side is totally fine. I know that can feel like a barrier for a lot of folks with kids at home, and it's no problem. We get it. Most of us are parents, and we really are here to support each other and our whole selves as activists and parents and educators and caregivers, so we don't have to feel like our activism or our political engagement is separate from our lives as parents, families, and teachers, but that we're all one and in it together. We'll send you a link with more info, so definitely get in touch if you want to plug in. We also want to let you know about a couple upcoming events. So we're launching a really exciting new virtual program that's sort of a online version of our kids program. It's called Climate Defender Kids, and it's basically, we're going to launch it as a monthly program with weekly sessions once a week in August, and we'll be engaging elementary age kids in learning activities and age-appropriate action around topics of climate change, social justice, and activism. And it's created by professional educators, parents, and activists, and it's a free program. So check that out. I am going, Leonard dropped a link in the box. It starts on August 5th. And then just want to mention that this is the first in a series of webinars that we're planning that will continue to hold as long as we can no longer meet in person, and possibly even afterwards. We'll be releasing the information about our next 2 webinars shortly, but I'll sort of give you a quick teaser right now on the 2 topics that we're working on. So one will focus on intersection between climate change, climate justice, and racial justice, and we'll be highlighting some local initiatives led by frontline communities here in Portland and around the state, and ways that they're asking others to join and take action. The other will feature a local psychologist who's focused on climate anxiety, who will talk with us about the psychological and emotional elements of parenting in the time of climate crisis and cultivating hope during this difficult time. So everyone who registered for this event will receive a follow-up email, which will include links to Mary's work, Mary's website, and also some of the resources that Mary referenced in her presentation. It'll also include a link to the recording so you can view it again later, and also links to the resources that we mentioned today. So I want to just give a big thanks again to you, Mary Democker, for joining us. It's been a pleasure working with you on this, and we really appreciate all your insights and thought-provoking and inspiring words. So, and I really want to thank you all so much for joining us today, for being interested and engaging around these difficult topics, and working together to build a brighter future for our kids and their generations. So thank you all so much for being here. We hope that you'll stay in touch, and we hope to see you next time.